Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram. And you can support me on Locals, Subscribe Star, and Buy Me a Coffee. And also don't forget to check out my Substack. So today we're going to start off with a brief discussion of Auron MacIntyre's recent interview with Moldbug entitled "The Cargo Cult Democracy." This was something that Charlie, aka Charlemagne, who I was on a couple weeks ago talking about Moldbug, recommended that we look into this. And I mean, ultimately, it's a hot mess. It's the hour and 45 minutes could have really been just half an hour, and we could have avoided a lot of the nonsense here. One, this shows us that Moldbug is just as disorganized in his presentations now, 16 years later, as he was in 2007. Arguably, he's more disorganized, and we can get into that a little bit later. So the riddle still stands. Why is Moldbug popular? How did he ever get popular? Two, the other thing is the line that we're doing, starting with 2007, we've sort of made, well, maybe not predictions because Moldbug's been around a while, but I've made some statements of assumptions based on what I've been reading. One, this interview with Auron MacIntyre, who, again, this is about Auron. He did a good job, as much as can be expected, interviewing Moldbug, who was incoherent. The idea that everything that we're piecing together from 2007 about how Moldbug thinks and acts and how Moldbug's kind of just off his rocker is still relevant today. And I mean, for like a whole hour, he has this deranged analogy between consensual and non-consensual sex and Ron DeSantis, which we don't really need to get into because he uses other language which could get people flagged, and I don't want to get flagged. And it's absolutely insane. It literally goes nowhere. And to add to this dumpster fire, he just pours some 200 proof alcohol on it because now he's talking about 200 proof. And I'm like, well, it's insane. Now, the thing that Auron was trying to get at during that part of the conversation was, well, Moldbug, but critics of you, I think he means the people that didn't like elves versus hobbits, you could only lose the culture war, are going to say, well, look, if we just sit around grilling and doing hobbity stuff and don't care about politics, and you have this, idea of like a dark elf insurgency, well, what do we do in the meanwhile? Like, what's the steps to victory? There's like, you have an idea. Step 2 is nothing. Step 3 is win. They're like, well, what's in the middle? Well, nothing's in the middle. And at that point, Moldbug never explained what was in the middle. So for that part, the part about DeSantis and tactics, what was your thoughts, Logos?
I mean, the point he was trying to make was, it could have been made very, very succinct. It's a very simple point. Basically, all he was saying was stop playing your hand too early. So if you don't have the power to ram through a long march of the institutions, then all you're really doing is counter-signaling to the enemy who still has the power that they need to be more draconian in dealing with you. So to use an example, let's just look at a school. Ron DeSantis does a policy of, no teaching kids to be ashamed of their race in K through 12 or something. Now, the problem is that law will work so long as DeSantis is governor. But he's going to have to fight enforcement the whole way through. So if a teacher breaks the law, you're going to have some reporting process for that teacher, some disciplinary process for that teacher, some way of firing that teacher beyond the scope of teachers' unions, legal battles, stuff like that. And make no mistake, there will be some nasty court cases tied up in this, be it via like freedom of speech issues or something else. Not even saying he's wrong to have a law like this. I'm just saying here's some barriers. Now, while DeSantis is tied up with these barriers, his governorship is temporary. I think a lot of states have like a 2-term limit on being governor and stuff like that. Now, if the next guy can't pull off a DeSantis, then what has he really accomplished? Well, the laws can be reversed. All the stuff can be reversed. But what he's done is he's flagged his intent, the intent of the Republicans, to the enemy while gaining no permanent ground, really. Now, this is his... All this is to say, he sums that up as you're being non-consenty as far as sexual relations go.
That's good. Good.
Right? Non-consent-y. You haven't engaged in a forceful non-consensual intercourse, but you're giving off non-consenty vibes is how I would say it. Because you've done nothing of permanence. And so the analogy he'd use is like non-consensual sex is how a lot of babies were made, basically. And so there's a permanent benefit gained by people doing that, and the fact that they have offspring from an evolutionary advantage, let's say. And so because they're able to spring the trap, get it done, and get babies, they got what they wanted, basically, is what his analogy hinges on. Now, what you're doing is signaling to people that you're willing to apply that kind of force, but you have no way to carry it through given the type of power and institutional entrenchment the enemy has against you. And so because of that, he thinks that what DeSantis is doing is counterproductive. Now, I disagree with Moldbug about that, but I got to give him some due. He's not completely wrong about that. There's a way to disagree with them in like a nuanced way. I'd say like 70-30, maybe 60-40 in him being wrong about that. That's basically the general point he was trying to make. Now, where he went off the rails, I really disagreed with him, is when he pushed forward and said the worst thing he could have said was, so the way to solve this problem is to stop caring about issues and start caring about power. Now, two issues with this. The first issue, and I think the elephant in the room, is people get you in power to do something for them. And so if you keep reneging on that promise because all you're doing is searching for more power, this is the exact problem that people have with the neocon establishment. We'll compromise on immigration. We'll compromise on school reform. We'll compromise on this, but we want to get these backdoor committees, these select smoke-filled room deals, and all these things to establish our power in Congress. Well, people don't know what's in it for them out of all these power brokering deals and all these concessions being made out of the neocon establishment, and so they get fed up. So finally, Trump comes along and says, you know what? Hey guys, I'm going to stop doing these euphemisms, these backroom deals. What do you want? I'll get it for you. They said, we want an end to Roe v. Wade. Trump said, got it.
They got it.
And they got it. I'll nominate the justices. It's going to get done. Here you go. Right? At a certain point, people stop believing the neocon lies that if you just keep giving them more power, good things are going to happen to them. How many decades did they try that and nothing could happen to them? So ultimately, that power has to culminate in something. It has to. You've promised people just a little more time, let's get more power, just a little more time, let us get more power. After so many decades of waiting, they're going to expect something big. And so for Moldbug to start at the whole Roe v. Wade thing was stupid, because you have a contingent of Republicans who had waited decades for something like this to happen, letting neocons do all sorts of slimy stuff for more power. And finally, they wanted to capitalize on for once. So this idea that you can rule by just promising the people who elect you that, if only we have more power and you can do this in perpetuity, it's foolish. You have to give them something or they're going to stop backing you. Political parties are basically guilds or fraternities of people who all care about a certain kind of issue to get their kind of person in office who will have their back on that issue. That's what the NRA is for. That's what the Republican Party's for, in association with the NRA, whatever. I mean, obviously, NRA is boomer tier at this point. I get it. There are other organizations. I don't keep up with guns rights stuff, but you get the idea. It's analogous, okay? So the entire point is you have these fraternities of people that lobby for your interests in politics. That's the basis of political parties. And if your interests aren't being lobbied for because politicians just want more power to lobby for your interests in the future, nothing's going to get done. And people are going to get mad and lose faith in the organizations. That's the first reason why. I'm sorry, I'm a little ranty here. That's the first reason why what Moldbugs did was stupid. Is realpolitik. You've got to throw him a bone. The other issue with what Moldbug said, and this is a more subtle issue, is it's not clear where power ends and issues begin in a lot of circumstances. And this is something that Auron brought up in the interview, trying to kind of get Moldbug to accept the point. What you have is K through 12 institutions that are kind of like indoctrination mills, that are kind of making this vanguard of left-wing voters. this idea that like when you're younger you're liberal, when you're older you're conservative. It's like, well, okay, here's a decent parsimonious explanation for that. When they're young, they just got out of the clutch of the school system, and when they're older, they learn about the real world and the hard knocks independent from the isolated clutches of the school system. That's why they become more conservative over time, or you'd think. Um, okay, well, a good option to steal election power might be interrupt the ideology mill in the K through 12 systems. That is both an issue. Parents want more control over what their kids learn and the values forced on them in schools. It's also a power play. You are stopping the indoctrination of the next generation of voters. And this is important because Moldbug talked about uh, one of the good things DeSantis did. Sorry, there's a lot of names. I'm foggy today. DeSantis did was the voting reform that he thinks explains the red wave in Florida. Maybe not completely, but substantially. He says it accounts for like 5% of the margin or something like that. And so yeah, so if voting reform is a way of extracting power, then making sure your enemies can't continuously cultivate a voting base out of your children would be another kind of voting reform that can also help you steal power. So this idea of issues versus power isn't dichotomous as he'd have the audience believe. And so while he is making a good point of, stop playing your hand, focus on victories that can be permanent if you can help it, um, he took it too far and I think lost the plot.
So before I respond, this is a somewhat relevant comment. How much of Moldbug is concern trolling?
Too much.
Yeah, too much. Okay, so you brought up a lot of good points here, Logo, so I want to get into some of them here. So the first thing I want to say is, okay, the idea that those who don't have power don't want to provoke those who have power to react is stupid. That's literally the playbook of every insurgency in the 20th century. What do you think the VC did? They wanted to provoke the United States to overreact. The Taliban wanted to provoke the United States to overreact, and guess what? It worked. So how do we know that DeSantis and Republicans like him aren't trying to do that? We don't.
In some cases, we know they are.
In some cases, we know they are, which actually is a viable strategy that works.
The book example is a good one. So, for example, like the left has been sneaking these pornographic books into libraries, and the Republicans have been siphoning them out. And what they're trying to get the left to do is die on the hill of we want porn books in your kids' libraries. There's no way they can react to that in favor of that position that doesn't make them look absolutely creepy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, but we also have good reason to believe this because there was a book that was written or published, rather, I think it was in 2017, called Conservative Insurgency, and it was written by Kurt Schlichter. He's one of these thinkers. Okay, 2014. It's in the name, insurgency, right? And this is all the rules for radical Saul-Alinsky stuff, where you get the left to react to what you're doing. And so this is an idea that's, quote, been gestating for a while. I mean, obviously, probably before 2014. And so if you wanted to be, what's the word, parsimonious or charitable to someone like DeSantis, that's what you'd assume he's doing. And then the other thing is you mentioned the supply issue, Logos, of the children being brainwashed. This just shows you how brain damaged Moldbug is. We also saw this with Raging Mandrill's response to "you can only lose the culture war." If you just wait and let the Democrats brainwash all your kids and flood the country with immigrants, guess what happens, Logos?
You lose power. So
You lose.
So sometimes issues are tied to power, and Moldbug cannot easily untangle the two.
No, and of course, if you do nothing, then they win. And so, and you've mentioned this before, I think when we covered the article, "You Can Only Lose the Culture War," how long do we have to wait for this seduction to take place? I mean, how long? Moldbug's been trying apparently since 2007.
Right. And that's the thing. You have to wait an indeterminate amount of time for shadowy dark elves among the elites that can't out themselves, so you don't know who they are. You have to wait an indeterminate amount of time for people you don't know to trust a plan you haven't seen to give you some amount of cultural power that you won't fully understand when it happens, because it's going to be a subtle cultural change.
Right. So that's insane. That's lunacy. But the other thing is, everybody, if you can go back to episode 1, if you can remember all the way back to when we covered formalism, I said that if we just didn't want to write off Moldbug as a complete retard, and there's some deeper thinking pattern there, it's the fact that he's a Stirnerite. He just believes in the acquisition of power. The idea that property rights are just determined by those who can hold them. Doesn't matter how you got a hold of them, just as long as you can keep holding it. He basically said what I predicted he actually believed. He said, we don't care about issues, we just care about power. So just for the record, that's I made that statement months before the interview. And Moldbug hadn't come out and said this yet, not in any sort of unambiguous way. So this shows us that whatever line Logos and I are taking on reading Moldbug, there's been a trajectory that he's been on for the last 13 years. And we're accurately describing it because we're literally calling these things before they happen. Anything you want to add there?
Nope, sounds good to me.
Now, this is a little bit more out of the way, but we know Moldbug is at least not too far away from the CFR. We covered that Logos a little bit earlier. To what extent do you think this is a CFR plant trying to, screw the right out by giving him bad advice?
Yeah, I can't think of any charitable interpretation at this point, given all we've heard, all we've seen in interviews, all the hindsight Moldbug should have had from 2007 to 2021. I can't think of any interpretation of any of this as like well-meaning but bad advice. This is cynical towards some other end. It has to be. In 2007, we were giving Moldbug the benefit of the doubt. But the fact that he's still carrying on with the same tropes, given all we've seen in 2020, 16 years.
16 years.
16 years. Like, my charity form is gone.
There's something now. Again, this is actually something that I think is worth returning to, just to highlight this point. So I am going to do that real quick. Everybody, bring up a new unqualified reservations page, and we'll get back to our regular scheduled programming in not too long. But there's this really, really interesting thing about the Council on Foreign Relations, which I just have to bring up. Okay, let's see. Right. Okay, so here's the first thing I'm going to bring up. Council on Foreign Relations. We have this. Everybody see it. So this is a commenter that he's reposted. However, I think serious discussion begins on both sides when CFR personnel began appearing on television news programs with persons' names and the simple title Council on Foreign Relations beneath. Personally, I keep tabs on the world conspiracy by reading Foreign Affairs every month. Okay, now scroll down. There's a lot there, but that's the main thing. Moldbug says, indeed. As for honest economists, I hope to offer a little in that vein myself. So he's agreeing with this whole commentary that this guy gives, which means follow the CFR. Okay, well, he also says about the CFR. Is this it? No, that's in November. We're not there yet at all. Where does he say that? He said something about his uncle. Or half-step uncle. So I'll look this up real quick because there's some family relations here. Well, I guess I'll have to go to my Twitter then. Because I had it on my Twitter where I said Moldbug mentions also that he had an uncle in the Council on Foreign Relations. And so that's... Oh, here we go. Is journalism official? Okay, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I want. Is journalism official? We'll get there. Okay, and then we have... Here we go. While I'm revealing personal confidences, let me note that my stepfather, who certainly does not endorse these messages, is actually a member on the Council of Foreign Relations. Well, wait a minute, Logos. You pay attention when the Council on Foreign Relations man shows up, because that's what really is going on. And then Moldbug is now telling us, oh, by the way, my stepfather doesn't really approve of this, but he's in the Council on Foreign Relations. Logos, are we just supposed to read this and take no notice?
Well, again, this goes to his Moldbug's whole dark elf persona he's trying to craft, where I'm close enough to the elites to see what's going on. I'm related to somebody in the Council on Foreign Relations, but I'm one of the good ones. I'm one of the ones you can trust to try to change things from within on the behalf of you dumb hobbits.
Yes. I think at this point, as you've said, Logos, we've had enough time for that. If Moldbug were an honest actor, he should have learned some lessons, which he clearly hasn't learned. If his advice were ever taken, it would be completely catastrophic for the right. He doesn't seem to like the right winning. He got mad with the Dobbs decision. Like, I thought he wanted wins. The Supreme Court is the highest power in the land. If you can get Supreme Court victories, right? And remember, what did Clarence Thomas say? The legal reasoning behind Roe v. Wade upheld a lot of other legal positions that the right doesn't like, which I think it was in the Alito opinion that was leaked that got everybody mad.
Yep.
That said, we might have to revisit all these.
Yeah, gay marriage is one of the first ones on the table.
So what if all of the progressive activist legislation from the last 60 years gets overturned because Donald Trump put in the right judges? That's the biggest W in the history of the Republican Party, right, Logos?
Yeah, I mean, I can try to charitably steal man Moldbug here for a second. The broader worry about this could be something like this. If the right could get the Supreme Court victory by overturning precedent, basically, then there's nothing to stop the left when they get in charge of the Senate and the president or whatever from electing their justices and basically litmus testing them on overturning the overturning of precedent once again. So now, instead of the Supreme Court being like a permanent fixture of victory like it used to be, it's just going to be a partisan reflection of who had power during the time the justices were elected. Now, saying that, I understand Moldbug's worry that this victory wouldn't be permanent. However, what this does, even in the worst of times, is reveal the Supreme Court for something we already knew it to be. The left wanted to be on this high ground where, well, the Supreme Court is the law of the land. It's one of these three independent, virtuous branches of government. There's no political partisanship here, blah, 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 blah. This is just a good interpretation of the laws, right? They relied on that while they made terrible ruling after terrible ruling after terrible ruling. Well, if the worst case happens and basically presidents just start overturning, making justices to overturn precedents every single iteration when new justices retire, then all of the whole nonpartisan appeal of the Supreme Court just evaporates into smoke immediately. There's like no saving it, which is exactly what the right has been saying about the court forever, is that these rulings were partisan, they had no legal basis, they were terrible, and they had to go against this entrenched institutional conventional wisdom of like, well, I don't know about that, they have lifetime appointments, they don't have to run for re-election, they don't care what the Republican Party thinks in 2020 or whatever, they're just doing their thing. It's like, yeah, but I mean, it's very clear that there is no nonpartisan reading of the Constitution. This entire job the Supreme Court's doing has de facto been a super Congress, because Congress has been gridlocked, and so the very nature of their institution has been hyper partisanized, and so getting everybody to see that is a win, even if it's not a permanent one.
But the objection of I'm going to run with your Steelman objection. That's still facetious, because that's what the left started doing in the 60s in the first place.
Yep.
Overturning precedent with precedent. They've already been doing this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not like you're letting the cat out of the bag or the genie out of the bottle. It's already been out and running for like 60, 70 years.
All you're doing is punching back for a change.
Yeah. So basically, Moldbug is a voice to the right, mad that the right is punching back and winning. Now, if that doesn't stink like a rat or a snitch or an entryist, I don't know what does.
Well, also, I mean, what's even worse about that is what his desired solution would be. His desired solution would be to make, like, I don't know, being anti-abortion some cool countercultural thing. It's like, how long has that been tried? I mean, I remember when Juno came out, way back when at this point, because I'm getting old. Juno came out, and that was basically kind of like an anti-abortion film. She decided, teenage pregnancy. She decided to keep the baby, dealt with complications for adoption. It was interesting. It was kind of like an indie movie, kind of, that got a lot of popular attention, and it was basically the closest thing Hollywood was ever going to get, in my humble opinion, to making something like being anti-abortion countercultural, and it didn't move the needle one iota. So what miracle would Moldbug be waiting for the counterculture to do better? I can't think of a single one, but trust me, guys, we dark elves, we're thinking about it.
By the way, first of all, Juno came out 2007. Interesting.
Wow, that's timely.
Yeah. Also, now this let's get back to the seduction of the elites. This is such a stupid opinion. When in history does that ever happen? Did the Merovingians just wake up one day and say, yeah, Carolingians, yeah, we think you should be the rulers. You've convinced us that you're better able to hold power. Did the Bolsheviks, woo and seduce the Kerensky, and did Kerensky woo the Tsar, and they just convinced him that they were? No, there's always a power struggle. This is stupid. Going around begging hand in hand, please, please, please give me power. That has never worked. I don't know what insane pocket dimension Moldbug came from, but that never works.
Well, I can tell you exactly what assumption is fueling this argument.
What's that?
Well, this entire thing is fueled on the assumption that all the cultural changes we've been seeing are non-organic cultural changes, or they're organic. They're not being pushed by anything. Right?
Yeah.
Think about it. So if you think about it from that perspective, if the elites have just fatted themselves into a bunch of terrible ideas that are translating through the cathedral into policy, well, what we need is a way to subtly steer the system that generates these fads. So fad ideas that look spontaneous and subversive and awesome just happen to lean our way culturally, and they'll trickle through. It's the same bad assumption of the cathedral that's fueling all these bad opinions, when in reality, all of these, quote, fads that were pushed by people deliberately. We know who they were.
We know who they are. Now, at the time it was happening, so from like the 50s to like the 80s, most people didn't know, because it was a relatively well-kept secret. A lot of the research that I have access to was not yet done. But as of 2023, this is a completely inexcusable position to take. Completely inexcusable. I mean, if we have anything like the prime evil in the United States, it's the Rockefeller Institute. Like, literally everything bad can be traced back to the Rockefellers. At least most things bad. Okay, so to that point, Logos, this idea about, seducing power. And yeah, you're right. It is this idea that it's sort of organic or whatever, which it's not. It just, yeah, well, that was my point. That was the point I was going to make. None of this was organic. It all comes from either the deep state, like a lot of second wave feminism with the CIA, or drug culture, as Timothy Leary said, and then also, corporations. And furthermore, since the people that run these things, our McNamara's and Wolfowitzes are all the same people. They run the corporations, they run the government, they run the NGOs. None of these institutions are functionally independent from the other. It's all a sort of elaborate smokescreen and house of mirrors. Would you agree, Logos?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. So just to wrap up the dumpster fire, that was the Moldbug interview with Auron MacIntyre. The one good point that we can, I think, both agree Moldbug was making was that the right needs to play to win, and that they need to stop, messing around. Now, maybe they are playing to win now. That's, I guess, an open question. I was partly steelmanning DeSantis, because insurgencies do want to provoke stronger powers to overreact. But after that, Moldbug just crapped the bed. And that's that's about it. And then lastly, I guess the third point then is there's something very sinister about Moldbug's intentions. He never told us what they were in 2007, beginning in 2021 with the Coriolanus one, and then 2022 with You Can Only Lose a Culture War. What I didn't read either one of those when they came out, so the conclusions that I was coming to reading 2007 before I even read those seems to have been completely borne out by what we saw in this interview. So would you agree with those 3 points, Logos?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay, now we're back to the grind. Oh boy, here we go. Comments on his journalism official. Mentions Moldbug, September 22nd, 2007. The nice thing about really long posts is that they appear to scare away stupid and obnoxious people. Oh my gosh, Lucas. I can't help it. Like, there's so many stupid and obnoxious Moldbug fans. For example, Logos, my discussion with Charlie and then the chat for Auron MacIntyre. What is he talking about?
Yeah, right.
I don't believe UR has received a single stupid or obnoxious comment for several weeks now. Okay, I can't confirm or deny that. Since the internet is what it is, this can only be described as a miracle, and perhaps I should apply to the new Pope for preliminary beautification because reality reasserts itself. First, I need to apologize for an error in the post. As a number of critics have observed, a cable modem does indeed modulate and demodulate. I probably should have known this. My only defense is that if I didn't modulate and demodulate, it would almost certainly still be called a cable modem. This excuse is pathetic, I know, but I will stick to it. Seamus McClúey writes, a strange interpretation of the relationship between journalism and the state. Many news sources blogs that follow the tribulations of journalists throughout the world read like a record of the running battle that is the attempts of various governments to assault, imprison, or sometimes murder representatives of the press. Indeed, but if you accept the strange interpretations, what does this battle become? It becomes something even more interesting, a power struggle between different factions within the state. Does history suggest this is unusual? I did say history suggests that its absence would be unusual. I mean, call me a Bayesian, but see also this post on a red and blue governments. The mystery obviously is poorly concealed, but I don't expect drama from the archives. Randy writes, just an example, I have noticed several articles of late which have shifted from simply reporting the problems of Social Security and Medicare to assigning blame for the problems to the baby boomers, the greedy generation. Not wrong, right, Logos? What
Yep.
here is the what?
I was agreeing. I said, yep.
What we have is policy implementation, assigning the blame in the first step in deciding who gets the bill, and this policy is being initiated by or at least coordinated with the official press. Exactly. The role of the press in the modern Western state is to set the issues and declare winners and losers. This is as close as one comes to governing politics. Okay, now this is interesting, Logos. Let's think about this, right? So if Moldbug, within the Moldbug framework, okay, the role of the press is to declare winners and losers. Now, when Moldbug was kind of big the first time, back in like 2011, 2012, 2013, I think he actually even got National Review to write a response to him at one point. He was declared the loser. And now that he's crawled out from under the rock he was hiding in, he's also being declared the loser by the media. So when is Moldbug going to take a hint from his own philosophy?
Good question.
I mean, that's what he believes, right? The media declares winners and losers, and twice he's been declared the loser. So I don't know why he keeps going on with this.
Well, I think there's a different interpretation there, right? I mean, yeah. I think what Moldbug is going to say, consistent with his other philosophy, is the media declares him loser because he's against the interests that the state has in the media supporting the state. So, of course, it's going to be their job to declare him the loser.
Right. yeah. I'm the Dark Elf, guys. I'm the loser. See, you can trust me. Spartae's Oxley is another good example. I don't have a link handy, but it used to be said that the only two people who still thought Sarbox was a good idea outside of the press and the accounting industry, which could easily be mistaken for its corporate master, were Sarbanese and Oxley. Then Oxley gave a speech in which he apologized for the whole thing, explaining the legislation was concocted in a hurry under erroneous pressure from the public. Of course, what he really meant was pressure from Joseph Nogueira et al., but legislators tend to accept the Times opinion as generally accurate, including leading indicator of public opinion, and they are usually right to do so. After all, if the Pope condemns martial sodomy today, millions of Catholics will condemn it tomorrow. That bond is power. TGGP. Well, you see, here's the thing, though, Logos, right? Given that he was sort of advocating for this tech insurgency back in 2007, clearly the New York Times, as the arbiter of truth, has been replaced by Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, basically, because Facebook is now a meta press, where if those publications don't write articles they don't like, they can just censor the articles and limit their reach. Good example, that would be like the New York Post or whoever did that with the Hunter Biden thing for the election.
Yeah. TGGP writes, I never read the Times. There are so many sources of information out there. There's a lot of similarity among them, but that's because racist Confederate broadcasting wouldn't have as big constituency as you imagine. It's the tyranny of the market majority, and if Bush is the rebel against the empire of the Times, which may actually make him bad and them good, why did those who supported his war get promoted while critics whose warnings were correct got nowhere? Please, the name is Confederate Racist Television, or CRTV, now broadcasting live from Yena-occupied Louisiana, where our reporters are on the scene as, can you imagine? I certainly imagine, but thankfully I don't feel the need to share. I think you're right that CRTV would not have a huge audience, and I think it would be plenty sufficient for any modern cable network. But why is this? It's because events in the last 50 years have disenchanted and disillusioned the CRTV audience, convincing them that the lost cause is really lost, that Robert E. Lee was a no-good dirtbag, and that blacks are wonderful. Or is it because for the last 50 years, each generation has passed through an educational system controlled by its enemies? You didn't have to be a Confederate racist to answer this question. Well, now this is very timely, Logos. That yes, being controlled by the educational system of your enemies over 50 years can lead to culture change. Now, why is he telling DeSantis not to do that?
Good question.
What's up with that?
Yep.
This is a very good point. This paragraph right here is making a very good point. And yet now he's publicly taking the opposite stance. Because how are you supposed to do this, Logos, from the national level? It's going to have to be state by state if this is done.
Yeah, it has to be.
It has to be. So, yeah. I've always rather at least skim the Times because I want to know what the Times is thinking. But I'm not sure I'd recommend this for everyone. The case of the establishment pundits, Friedman, Beinart, etc., who supported the invasion of Iraq is fascinating. And I think to really deal with it, I need to deal with Iraq, which I've been putting off. Needless to say, my views on the subject are outrageous and will offend everyone. But I take a very different lesson from it. I think what it tells us is how dynamic and flexible the official press is, how carefully it avoids any misstep that might move it away from power. In 2003, it looked as if the invasion of Iraq would be a success. In fact, the invasion of Iraq was a success. It's the occupation that has failed. If the Times had gone full out Tom Hayden anti-war on us in 2003, and both the invasion and the occupation had proved successful, it would have looked like it was out of touch with reality, which the powerful can never afford because they do create their own reality. That's what power is. We create our own reality is what George Bush said or something. It's ridiculous. Somebody from his government. Is this the result of some conscious plan? Of course not. Did Friedman, Beinart, etc. even think of themselves as strategically maneuvering to retain power? Certainly not. Ambitious and successful people simply have an instinct for this game. They are naturals. If the U.S. was taken over by white nationalists and CRTV was playing on airport TVs, I suspect these very same pundits would be telling us about the resurgence of the Anglo-Saxon race, and if they weren't, others would. Okay, this is just plainly idiotic. He says, people don't strategically move for power in elite circles? Logos?
Wait. No, he couldn't have said that. No way.
He just said, did Friedman, Beinart even think of themselves as strategically maneuvering to retain power? Certainly not.
Okay, wait. Yeah, did they think of themselves as doing it? That's a different question than do they do it?
Well, you have to self-consciously do it. Planning, it's like you don't unconsciously plan ahead for a chess move. You consciously plan ahead for a chess move.
Well, again, this goes back to his whole the cathedral is an organic movement. Nobody is consciously systematically pushing these academic ideas, and so these academics don't see themselves as jockeying for power.
Well, but they are.
Well, they are, but they don't think of themselves that way. Some of them really are true believers. I'll give Moldbug that minor point. Some of them are true believers,
Some of them
but
are true believers, but
some of them are cynical.
But you see, even if you're a true believer, that's not the point that I'm arguing about. If you want your ideology to win, you still okay. For example, who's that guy, the bald guy that went crazy when Trump won in 2016? He was a Clinton advisor. He said that, like, you know what I'm talking about, right?
You talking about Robert Reich?
No. The bald guy. He looked like he was out of World War II or something, and he was a Clinton strategist. Can't think of his name. He played hardball all the time, and he knew what he was doing, and I think he also believed in what he was doing, but he still self-consciously planned it.
Yeah.
Jed Rothwell writes, the mainstream press treatment of cold fusion has been appalling, and it confirms your point. Many newspapers and magazines claim the cold fusion was never replicated or even that it was a fraud. Journalists never check the facts or read the peer-reviewed scientific literature. The fact is, cold fusion was replicated in hundreds of national laboratories, universities, and corporations. These replications were published in prestigious mainstream peer-reviewed journals. I'm actually somewhat fascinated by the story of cold fusion, which I first started reading about on sci.physics when the whole thing was broke. The Leaner LENR-CANR site is certainly worth a visit from anyone interested. I personally don't have the experience to apply Occam's razor in this case, but nor do I trust the official press to do so on my behalf. As far as I'm concerned, the whole issue remains somewhat mysterious. Cold fusion proponents have no convincing theory to explain their evidence, which is a little surprising given how well we understand atomic physics. Cold fusion opponents have no institutional incentive to investigate the subject because their bureaucratic victory is complete. There is simply no neutral authority I trust to tell me what's going on. B. Broadside writes, this is why I can't figure out why someone who would think of Bush as part of a rebel red government, he seems like a meddling multilateralist with bad grammar. There are rebel red government types in Washington, maybe even in Congress, but Bush isn't one of them. First, the red government isn't what it once was. If you think of Disraeli as the quintessential red government figure, we've come down a long way from there. Even the views of Jeane Kirkpatrick are no longer acceptable in Washington today, and if you set her substantive position next to those of a real imperialist, she looks like a wog-hogged rabble-rouser. But secondly, I think it's almost beside the point to ask what Bush thinks. It reminds me of the book I have called What Lincoln Believed by Michael Lind. The problem with figuring out what Lincoln believed is that all we have from Lincoln are his public statements, and Lincoln was a politician. We certainly know what his positions were. Can we derive opinions from these positions? Only with considerable helping of imagination. Well, let me think about this. Let's just take this as a thought experiment real quick, right? How do we know what Moldbug really believes? Like Lincoln, all we have are Moldbugs of public statements. And like Lincoln, Moldbug is kind of angling for politics.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you better let that dark elf in to run everything better. I mean, the whole ring of Finargo wasn't very subtle either. Bush is a politician too, and a pretty capable one as they go. What does Bush believe again? Again, I think it's impossible to know, and I'm not sure it really matters. Whatever beliefs he may have, he does not have the bureaucratic power to express them through personal initiative. The president's role in the modern American system of government is entirely passive. Wait, I don't know. Do you buy that, Logos?
Not even a little.
That's well, Obama was only like a year away, and Obama was very active. Well, yeah, we'll just let it go. This is a joke. Anon writes, I've started reading UR, and I'm not sure I understand the frequent usage of the word universalist. Well, he wouldn't be the only one, would he, Logos?
No.
Welcome, and please see my definition here. Note that universalism is the same thing Murray Rothbard called postmillennial pietism. I've already revised the terminology several times, and I'm thinking of doing so again. Reusing an existing word, even with a capital letter, seems to cause a lot of confusion. Oh, gee, you think? M. Travin writes, I think someone has pointed out earlier that on this issue you are on perfect agreement with Noam Chomsky, which doesn't make either of you wrong, of course, but it might make you uncomfortable. You certainly have a more entertaining style. As you point out, it's not so easy to step outside the consensus reality of the times. Those who do this consistently need to adopt some alternative narrative that organizes their worldview but also makes them sound like conspiracy kooks. And once you start exploring alternative realities, it's hard to know when to stop. What's fascinating about Chomsky is that, in a way, he is an infallible guide to reality. You just have to reverse him precisely. In Chomsky's mind, Poland is always invading Germany. For example, which institutions have more motive, opportunity, and propensity to spin the news? ExxonMobil or Columbia School of Journalism? I mean, can you believe this is actually an honest question this guy's asking?
Uh-huh.
As if ExxonMobil doesn't have a gazillion reasons to do that.
I mean, they have since the 70s. I mean, they've been burying studies about the environment and stuff like that, and yeah.
I don't know what to say. It's just, okay. Okay, let me go back to the sort of like conspiratorial reading of Moldbug. Either he's CFR or he's like some sort of like corporate plant. Like these takes are just insane, Logos.
Well, I mean, the problem is, can you really tell the difference between a libertarian or a corporate plant in any setting?
That's true.
I mean, he gets that suspicion just by being a libertarian and unironically quoting Mises. So what are you going to do?
True. Well, there's Coke money behind Mises, so we know where the line goes. What's going on in the mind of the Chomster is that he observes that the official press is 99.9% Polygon Universalist bureaucracy and 0.1% corporate spin. Oh.
That did not age well.
Dude, corporations run freaking everything.
They run everything.
What is he talking about? Okay, remember, Logos, 2007. Let's jump into the time machine. You know what's coming out right about now? All of the connections with Kellogg, Brown, and Roots and the war in Iraq. All of that was coming out around 2006 and 7.
That's pretty interesting.
I remember watching that stuff.
Also, this section of Moldbug's essay was brought to you by Pfizer.
Yes. I mean, I did have, full admission, Logos, that libertarian phase. But the idea of big corporations, not being the problem, I still followed the likes of Chomsky and other anti-war leftists to see that they're a problem. And wow, I mean, okay. Because he believes the former is utterly pure and the latter is deeply pernicious, he ignores the elephant and attacks the flea. Right, Logos, because Columbia School of Journalism is the elephant and ExxonMobil is the flea. Remember that. Obviously, if you went to the doctor and he told you that you were 99.9% healthy tissue and 0.1% cancer, you'd want him to cut out the cancer right away. So there's a method in Chomsky's madness. As long as you believe that the German people are the natural leaders of Europe and that they must defend themselves against the undurable insults of the aristocratic Jewified Poles and their Franco-British puppet masters, everything makes perfect sense. Chairman K writes, the CFR's official history, which you linked, is fascinating. The writing has an official BS quality, which would have been appropriate for any publication of the International Lenin School. Whoa, CFR shows up again. Isn't that really interesting, Logos? So what did he link? What article is he referring to? He's referring to continuing the inquiry. This must have been something in the comment section, which we don't see anymore. It has a kind of glorious carefulness, doesn't it? Every detail is 100% accurate, and yet the picture seems almost too good to be true. I especially admire how the author manages to skate around la faire his. You use your use of the word press as a synecdoche for media smudges some important details. The press is declining, and in some parts of society, the press no longer even exists because it's been wholly replaced by other non-press media. This cost structures and response time of the press constrain what can be printed therein, whereas other media have different constraints. Yeah, digital technology was replacing the press. So I remember when I was going to college, which was around this time, there was all this talk about, the death of the big presses. Whereas, these online news outlets, so we don't mean social media yet, but online news outlets were displacing these big organizations. I don't see a lot of intellectual distinction between newspapers and TV today, and the former certainly have a vast response time now visible on the web. To me, the boundary of the press is best defined by its broadcast structure, which associates economies of scale with intellectual centralization. So bloggers may be media, but they are certainly not press. Not all scientists care about getting published in the Gray Journal. Perhaps Margot was working in a field in which careful publicity can attract huge amounts of funding, but most scientists stay in the media. Journalists are useful idiots who never report confidence intervals and would much rather be on the cover of Nature than the front page of the New York Times. I'm sure this is true emotionally, but in terms of ruthless professional advancement, they might want to think again. Funding comes from Congress, whether we like it or not, and everyone along that chain respects power. Scientists who are media stars and who don't completely alienate their peers find it much easier, I think, to get what they want. Of course, there is a word other than star, which could be used in the above sentence, and no scientist is entirely without dignity, but the profession is what it is. Also, Nature and Science are, as I am sure you're aware, to some extent turning into the New York Times. Certainly on scientific questions of political weight, it's usually pretty easy to figure out where their editors stand. Moreover, these editors, while I'm sure they are better educated than the NYT science reporters, are after all journalists rather than scientists. Drank writes, out in the real world, though, I don't think the media is reliably playing the Ministry of Information role that you assign to them. Most of the time, they seem more played than a player to me. Said differently, your postulate war between blue government and red government is largely fought on the battleground of the national media. The pack of Washington journalists, I think, intentionally keep themselves ill-informed and spinnable, as that's what their sources value and hence how they maintain their status and perks. Bob Woodward is just the most egregious example of this. The Bush 43 administration, either due to incompetence at media manipulation or a vast amount of opposition from the civil service or both, has proved an endless display of policy disagreements and turf wars being fought through leaks to the national press. This is certainly true. See also my response to TGGP above. The press is the battlefield, but that battlefield has a shape, and I won't call it flat. Well, what's interesting about what Drank writes is, the treatment that Trump got from like this full court resistance from the left was analogous to, but much more severe than the one to Bush. Because I do remember how Bush 43 was fought tooth and nail by the left. But even then, that paled to Trump.
Yep.
But why should anybody else pay attention to all this inside baseball? Journalists are consistently rated as less trustworthy than used car salesmen and lawyers, which doesn't say much of their actual ability to shape public opinion. Blogs make endless fodder out of the bias, sloppy methods, secret sources, poorly concealed editorializing, credulous reporting, and repackaged spin that constitute most of the output of the national press. I see the MSM as closer to a national joke than a sinister agent of influence. Michael Totten is a great counterexample of an alternative reporter with a lot of competitive advantages over this mess. But it's becoming increasingly easy to find a Totten in many fields, some who can offer knowledge, informed and trustworthy writing without being beholden to official power. Someone who you'd want to read if you actually wanted to learn something, the realities of their field. I agree in general, but I fear he may be slightly overstating the number and influence of people who actually care about actually knowing what's going on in the world. The blogosphere has grown a lot, and it's developed some actual power, but the vast majority of even intelligent, college-educated people are still enormously dependent on the official press, and I would be pleasantly surprised if this changes as fast as you expect. Michael writes, I would like to note that I do in fact know of some settings where Times journalists would distinctly not be a feather in the host cap, but as discussed by Fussell, such settings are out of sight. Fussell's book on class is always right except where it's wrong, and it's frequently wrong. Little dollops of Marxism are everywhere. I'm sure certainly still some old optimates who look down on the press, but they don't matter. Finally, I just looked at the New York Times science column, John Trini's column, and I found that opposition of moderate sort to the drug war and global warming silliness were the first items showing. Thierry is a columnist, not a reporter, and that's his blog, not the column. We are pretty far down on the in-house dissident scale here, although not as far down as David Brooks. My first choice for a fanatical devotee would be James Simpson's, followed by Bloomberg, but Buffett would be my first choice among yours. I think you overstated the power of money. Logos, where is this coming from?
I don't know, man.
Money is wonderful, but it's not power, and it hasn't been power for quite some time.
Wow.
Certainly not since the post-Watergate campaign finance report. Sure, I would love a Moldbugista think tank, Dr. Simmons, if you're reading, but there are always such... Every political description of their impact on public opinion is not impressive, certainly not compared to the universities. Who do you think freaking...
Who funds them?
Look, you know what? This is something else that just came up. Recently on the cigar stream, Moldbug has been saying again recently that money's not power. Academic Agent brought on a few people. Let me see if I can find the episode.
Yeah, that should be interesting.
Where they talk about this. And I'm just like, does money have power? Auron MacIntyre and Black Horse are on it. And I'm like, what the heck is wrong with this guy? Logo, 16 years later, he's still saying the same crap after the 2011 class war, race war takeover that totally defeated the Occupy movement. So I got a question here then, Logo. So, well, we're not going to watch it now. But given that Moldbug is on the same broken record 16 years later, what do you think about doing a follow-up on the cigar stream where these three talk about money and Moldbug?
Yeah, I'm always up for it.
At least doing something. I think it's worth a response, especially since Moldbug has been on this brain damage take. Look, the Fed runs everything, guys. I mean, Ron Paul was saying this, Logos. Come on.
Yeah. It used to be part of English 101, for crying out loud, that you teach people what is the funding source behind articles when you want to see like where the bias lies and stuff like that. The only problem is people haven't applied the same reasoning to journals. Who funds the journals? Who funds the departments? Who funds who gets hired? Who funds what university policy is? I mean, it's certainly not the state, because we're seeing that like state governors, like Texas, what's going on right now? Like the governor was just like, look, you universities are going to cut this out or we're going to fund you. Texas A&M or whatever. And immediately, the very next day, Texas A&M was so bold to do a Zoom meeting talking about like how they could circumvent the government's order. That's how bolden these people are. Universities aren't funded out of the goodness of the state's heart. They don't care about state funding. They will straight up fight the governor tooth and nail on state funding because they know they're going to have rich sugar daddies take care of them if state funding ever gets goofy. So the defiance is the point.
Yeah. Real quick, I was looking through the chat. The guy I was bringing up was James Carville.
Oh, him. Okay. Yeah, the bald guy. I'm like, there's a lot of bald people in politics.
Well, because he was a cutthroat player, but I think he also believed it too.
That's true. Yeah.
But yeah. I mean
But this gets to the usual equivocation, right? When Moldbug is talking about elites, there are a lot of different people he could mean. He could mean the head of a corporation. He could mean a journalist. He could mean an academic. He could mean somebody that's like in power relations and politics. And this is part of the problem that you and Dave had in your stream, talking about like CEOs. Are we talking about a MySpace CEO like Tom who made some money and dipped because he was in over his head? We're talking about somebody else. When Moldbug's talking about an elite, is he talking about an academic or is he talking about somebody like a Carville? The plausible deniability, I think, at this point is the point. He uses these muddy, obfuscatory terms to cause this kind of confusion.
Well, it's on purpose because, as I said, they're all the same people. McNamara and Wolfowitz went seamlessly through all of these three areas: private, public, and international. So, yeah, it's on purpose. Yeah. Wow. Same day. Overcome like a fiend by the urge to link. Logos, where does he come up with these titles?
I don't know.
What is this even supposed to mean? Overcome like a fiend by the urge to link. That's just gibberish. It doesn't mean anything. September the 22nd, 2007. I'll be traveling for a week or so posting will be light. Although barring emergencies, I will get Thursday's update out on schedule. In the meantime, some links you may enjoy. Frequent commentator Boris Broadside has escaped from LiveJournal and relaunched his blog, Former Kerensky. I have it on good authority that Broadside has a black belt in public policy, and wherever he learned to wield his axe, he certainly didn't learn it from me. If you disagree with him, be prepared to be bisected. Edward Williams' Reality is a poem in 7 parts. As always, Williams is a little nasty, but neither brutish nor short. My feeling is that these can be enjoyed separately and need not be taken as a single horrendous shot. The poet may disagree, but screw him. If you are reading this and you think Edward Williams sucks, we'll just finish it. Please be prepared to make your case by sending me a link to your own work. I will post this link if and only if it is as good or better than Edward Williams, unless it really is really bad, in which case I will post it anyway, perhaps along with some mocking commentary. Hey, you know what never happened yet, Logos? Is Moldbug ever going to get to that, cage fight between old philosophers? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That never happened. Well, we're still in 2007, so maybe it does happen later.
Well, I don't think it was ever going to happen. I think it was just something he'd be interested in thinking about. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? And let go Blowhard's infamous interview with Gregory Koran, part 1, part 2, in which Koran comes across as a cross between Richard Feynman and the Soup NS. See the comments to part 1, in which yours truly straps on the gloves and goes mano a mano with Dr. Cochran, who in all fairness is playing a sort of 16 at a time blindfold exhibition match. I think it's pretty clear that one of us gets pwned, but I will leave it to you, dear reader, to decide who. In all fairness, Cochran is literally my favorite living scientist. BTW, I'm not kidding about College Bowl. At age 13, Mench's team won the Baltimore area its academic championship, and as a 17-year-old junior, he was the anchor of a side that came within 30 points of beating MIT, whose teams were perennially stocked with blatantly ineligible, balding grad students in the regionals. He was probably a lost step or two. He's certainly a lot fatter and he drinks more. But these victories we actually beat MIT once before we lost to them twice, were his great successes in life and is prepared to defend them by any means necessary. Okay, I could have just skipped that one. Okay, this is actually the one that everybody seems to like, Logos, so we'll see if everybody's right or wrong about this. How Dawkins Got Pwned. Oh, chapter 1. There's a few of these. September 26th. I want to see how this works. Is this... All right. That's how it works. Cool. Chapter 1. Richard Dawkins recently wrote a book called The God Delusion. You've probably heard of it. Professor Dawkins is a great scientist and one of my favorite writers. I have no quarrel at all with his argument. Logos! I have no quarrel at all with Dawkins' argument. Why is this guy like the darling of trads?
Because what everybody seems to keep saying is Moldbug's really good at pointing out some of the system's flaws. He's just terrible at enacting solutions.
But he won't identify money.
Exactly. Yep.
Like, if you don't identify money, then just go home.
And that's my problem with Moldbug as a critic. My retort is he's not even a good critic because he doesn't understand the true relationship between intergenerational corporate power and the institutions he thinks are the cathedral.
Yeah. Which to his credit, Chomsky at one point used to know. Before he became a cheerleader for the GAE, but, whatever. I was raised as a scientific atheist, and I've never seen the slightest reason to think otherwise. Okay, Moldbug, just... Oh my gosh. These days I prefer the word non-theist for reasons which will shortly be clear, but there's no substantive difference at all, except in the context of role-playing games. I have no interest whatsoever in gods, goddesses, angels, devils, dryads, water elementals, or any such presumed metaphysical being. Nevertheless, it's my sad duty to inform the world that Professor Dawkins has been pwned. Perhaps you're over 30 and you're unfamiliar with this curious new word. A la Wiki puts it, the word pwn remains in use as an internet social culture slang, meaning to take unauthorized control of someone else or simply belong to someone else by exploiting a vulnerability. At least here at Unquad Reservations, pwned alterates with posse and rhymes with loaned. How could such a learned and wise mind exhibit such an exploitable vulnerability? And who or what has taken unauthorized control of Professor Dawkins? The aliens, the CIA, the Jews, the mind bloggers, as well it should. Patience, dear reader, all will become clear. Professor Dawkins' explanation of religion, with which I agree completely, okay, is that religion is a memeplex built around central delusions. Around a central delusion, the God meme, an extremely unsubstantiated proposition. Religion exists because this memeplex is adaptive. This explanation is both necessary and sufficient. It is also parsimonious, a la Occam's razor. It may not be simple, but it's a heck of a lot simpler than God. Well, you know what the answer to that is, Logos. You know what the what God is defined as?
What?
Simple. Simple.
Oh no.
I mean, I know that's going down the rabbit hole with divine simplicity, and I actually have some problems with that. But this is stupid, right? Right. The kind of God that Dawkins was going up against, this sort of philosopher God, that sort of Craig and all these other guys came to defend. Though, of course, Craig's also not divine simplicity. They would all say God's simple. So, like, what's this argument even supposed to mean? Right? Most of the people who Dawkins would be arguing against would argue that God is simple.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just stupid. And the other thing is, no, but it's not parsimonious, right? Let's say the universe were completely randomly created. Well, gee, Logos, isn't it just amazing that this random generated universe just happens that the Christian memeplex is the most adaptive? Why would that be? If it's completely random and there's no reason for anything, why would that happen to be the most adaptive?
Well, I mean, there is an argument to be made there, but I don't know.
Yeah, now I'm having my focus distracted, Logos. My ire at Dawkins or Moldbug. It's going to be hard to get through these.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be hard, man. I don't know if I can do this. I dislike the word meme and the complex of terminologies that's grown up around it, mainly because A, the word has a dorky sound, and B, it means the same thing as idea. However, in deference to Professor Dawkins and his numerous acolytes, I'll use it for this discussion. In Darwinian terms, Professor Dawkins' main point is that the adaptive interests of religion or any other memeplex are not necessarily the same as the adaptive interests of its host. As a celibate priest, for example, you are helping Christianity be fruitful. Are you helping Christianity to be fruitful and multiply? It's performing no such service for you. Biologists have a word for this, parasitism. Probably because he wants to be nice. Richard Dawkins does not try to use the P word because he's clearly thinking it. The God delusion is a parasitic meme because being alien to reason, it cannot serve the interests of the host. Furthermore, some of the memeplex are religions which can include far more pernicious memes such as suicide bombing, which are lethal to both the host and anyone within the blast radius. The case would seem to be closed. Well, this is an idiotic argument. Like, why would anybody go to war for their country then? You're just going to die, and you're not going to benefit from the fruits of your country.
Yeah.
That's literally so stupid. It's like, yeah, why would anybody go to war for their country or sacrifice for their children?
Well, if they've already had children, then they're sacrificing so their children can be successful and continue their line. But
if you're dead, as we know from statistics, if you're not raised by your biological parents, all your life chances go way down. And so your genetics might not continue.
Maybe they don't.
But immunology is tricky after all. Professor Dawkins is right. Anyone who believes in God is most certainly prone, that is, infected by a parasitic religion memeplex. That parasitic religious memeplex, this word salad, it's killing me. This category includes some of the smartest people in the world today. Intelligence is certainly no barrier to memetic infection. Worse, there have clearly been periods of civilized history in which everyone was infested by this parasite. The things are dangerous, there is no doubt. Therefore, without disputing Professor Dawkins' Darwinian conclusion, I think it's prudent to step back a little and attack the problem with a slightly broader, more careful approach. Well, wait a minute, right? So he says, as a celibate priest, for example, you're helping Christianity be fruitful and multiply. It's performing you no such service. Well, then, by this definition, the state and civilization itself are just irrational memes.
Yep.
Right? They'd have to be. So, speaking of how ideas got popular, how did this idea get popular? It's so obviously stupid.
The War on Terror.
Yeah, and that explains it. Let's see. Okay, we did that. I think. The God delusion is what immunologists might call a specific immune response. Professor Dawkins notes that religion is alien to the reasoning mind. He notes that it reproduces and evolves. He sees that similar phenomena have caused many problems in the past and continue to do so in the present. He identifies a common feature of these problems, the God meme, and turns out antibodies to it. Well, just FYI, everybody, as of 2023, he failed. So just remember that, everybody, he failed. The process is not infallible. Suppose, for example, you note that a patient is ill and can't eat. You take a biopsy of his gut and find that they're full of bacteria. Bacteria are clearly not human, but are a well-known cause of disease. So the obvious problem is that the patient has a bacterial infection and you prescribe broad-spectrum antibiotics. Moreover, the poor fellow is dying of colon cancer and you're trying to eradicate his intestinal flora. Biological immune systems make all kinds of mistakes. Presumably the same is true of memetic immunology. After all, what was the Inquisition thinking? They thought of heresy exactly the same way Dawkins thinks of a religion, as a sort of mental virus whose eradication, while unavoidably painful, will bring peace and sanity. In memetic immunology, it's often very difficult to distinguish a parasite from counterparasite. When you see two populations of memes in conflict, we know both cannot be healthy. Because a healthy meme is true by definition, and the truth cannot conflict with itself. However, we might very well be watching two parasites competing with each other. They will certainly both claim to represent truth, justice, in the American way. So I think it might be worthwhile to attack the question from another angle, using the analogy of a generalized immune response. Rather than asking ourselves whether specific traditions such as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, etc. are parasitic, we can focus on the problem of parasitic memeplex as a whole. If Christianity, Judaism, Islam turn up on the screen, perhaps we'll just point to some T cells at them. But a generalized approach will also detect any other parasitic memeplex you may be infected with. After all, the God delusion isn't the only delusion in the world. One way to, this is such a facile piece of crap. I mean, religions that have been around for, in the case of Judaism, 3,000 years, Christianity 2,000, and Islam 1,400 are not going anywhere anytime soon. Like, why would anybody think they're going to go away? One way to approach. Oh, I did that one. Oh, wait, yeah. One way to approach generalized memetic immunology is to design a generic parasitic memeplex, avoiding specific details which may confuse us. In focusing on the combination of adaptive success and parasitic morbidity, we can construct design rules for an optimal memetic parasite. We can evaluate potential threats by looking at how well they fit this template, which should be as nasty as possible. When dealing with actual biological, so is this a Moldbugs version of the gain of function?
It might be.
Maybe that was the whole point of Moldbug's work. He was a kind of like memetic gain of function. What do you think, Logos?
Above my pay grade. Released
by the TFR. There we go, guys. There we go. That's the full conspiracy theory wrote. He's released by the CFR to do gain of function research on toxic memes. Of which wow. When dealing with actual biological agents, of course, we can work in biosafety labs. The most dangerous viruses, such as smallpox, Ebola, and the 1918 flu, cannot safely be handled without elaborate, multiply redundant containment systems. Some would argue that they cannot be safely handled at all. With memes and memeplexes, there's none of this. By designing the memeplex, we effectively release it into the wild. Fortunately, UR has a small and discreet audience, which strikes me as a very wise and conscientious. I'm sure none of you will be tempted to abuse this dangerous memetic technology, which in the hands of less scrupulous thinkers could easily become a formula for total world domination. Remember, this is only a test. Well, given how many ankle-biting fans he has, who are clearly not wise and conscientious, is this sort of like Moldbug giving us a nudge, nudge, wink, wink? I'm doing this on purpose. Is this Moldbug's Wuhan?
It would not be inconsistent with his style.
Wow. Yeah, that's probably what it is. So our generic parasitic memeplex will be as virulent as possible. Well, dude, Logos, this is what I've been saying. It will be highly contagious, highly morbid, and highly persistent. A really ugly bug. Let's focus on the design aspects separately. Contagion, morbidity, and persistence. A contagious memeplex is one that spreads easily. The template may not have to infect everyone in the world, although that's certainly one option. However, for any really significant morbidity, well, we'll want massive lemming-like misdirected collective action. This requires mass infection. There are 3 general ways to transmit a memetic parasite: parental transmission, educational transmission, and social transmission. Needless to say, our template should be a champ at all of them. If your parasite can't be transmitted parentally, it's really not much of a parasite. Children learn the basic principles of reality and morality before they are 6. And as the Jesuit proverb goes, anything that can slip into that age is likely to stick. Give me the child and I'll give you the man. Fortunately, any simple idea, even if it's all nonsense, can be transmitted at this age, unless the template is fundamentally dependent on some meme which children are unlikely to grasp, such as partial differential equations. Parental transmission is no problem. Basic educational transmission, infection of children and young adults by institutions, whose ostensible purpose is to instill universal knowledge and ethics, is the mainstay of any successful memetic parasite. Since the same institutions educate future educators, replication can continue indefinitely. Well, there you go, Logos. Moldbug knows that the educational system is the prime vehicle for all this, and he's attacking DeSantis for trying to take it back.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell you?
That he's not an honest actor.
Yeah. Over multiple generations, educational transmission outcompetes parental transmission. Yes. Changes of religion by executive fiat, for example, are common in European history. In more recent past, the Allied victors eradicated militarist traditions in Germany and Japan through their control of the education system. Furthermore, by treating the press as an educational institution, we create a system of continuing lifelong reinforcement in which parasitic memes are omnipresent. Of course, it's important to remember that exactly the same techniques can also cure a memetic infection. But neither parental nor educational transmission can bootstrap itself from small initial infection, while most parasitic memes probably originate as mutations of pre-existing memes. They can certainly be invented from scratch, unlike genes, and even a mutation has to spread somehow. Therefore, no memetic parasite is complete without a system for social transmission, informal transmission among adults following existing social networks. The first step in designing for social transmission is minimizing pre-existing immunity. NS, for example, would not be an adaptive meme for a 21st century parasitic memeplex because so many prospective hosts have strong negative reactions to NS, swastikas, etc. Any meme which conflicts with its prospective host's present perception of reality or morality is socially maladaptive. The second step in designing for social transmission is to look at the status structure of social networks and construct memes that will flow naturally along the usual network direction from high status to low status. That is, our parasite should be intellectually fashionable. So is this like being rebranded now as seducing the elites? Is this where it's all coming from, Logos?
I think so, yeah.
All the cool people in town should want to get affected. Well, there you go, right? An infection will make them cooler. Does he ever have new ideas? He hasn't moved an inch in 16 years.
I'm disappointed given the timeliness of this article with what we just reviewed.
I can't believe it. We hit the jackpot, didn't we, Logos?
He's just Dawkins. He's just repackaged Dawkins.
Who doesn't change in 16 years? Money has no power. We need to be cool, guys. What is this? They will be the hosts with the most. For example, one common trope in various religious traditions is asceticism, the voluntary renunciation of material comforts. Since this tends to be much easier for those who start out wealthy and comfortable, it's an effective status marker. Any memes that can associate themselves with asceticism get a clear adaptive advantage. Our parasite is not optimized for contagion, but is it bad? Is it truly evil and destructive? No, you see, it's not actually bad because it's not a virus, Logos. It's to immunize you, right? So it's actually like the good form. The most contagious parasitic meme in the world, if at all, brings to its hosts if all it brings to its host and those around them is happiness and prosperity, isn't worth worrying about. Oh, there you go, right? It's actually the cure, guys. So we need to move on to morbidity, which is a fancy medieval medical word which means badness, meaning badness. The key to memetic morbidity is that for a really nasty parasite, morbidity must be essential to its reproductive cycle. Otherwise, because morbidity is after all nasty, it will probably be maladaptive. Our parasite will be outcompeted by a benign mutation of itself, totally defeating the purpose. Most forms of morbidity involve a political step in the replication process. In other words, they allow the parasite to obtain informal power, which it can use to take over educational institutions, suppress counterparasites, and competitive power, etc. There is no period in the history of any human civilization in which the political, including military power, has not been a crucial factor in the struggle of ideas. This is not to say that such a level playing field or a marketplace of memes cannot be created, only that it has not yet been done. Well, you see what he's trying to do here is he's trying to be stupid, because he just said in 2 articles ago, money has no power, which is stupid. Money runs everything today. So if money doesn't run everything, what is it, Logos? It's the memeplex.
Yeah.
It's the memeplex. It's not money, everybody. Oh, this is so bad. First, a parasitic meme is not even parasitic if it's not delusional. Whoa, that's a tall order there, Logos. It must contain some assertion which is alien to reason, which no sensible person would independently invent. The God delusion, a metaphysical construct like Russell's teapot with no basis in reality, is a perfect example. How can a delusion be on its own adaptive? Very easily. A delusion is a perfect organizing principle for any kind of political movement. By accepting some body of non-existent doxology, you demonstrate your loyalty to the group. The result is a cohesive collective action. As we'll see, most forms of parasitic morbidity involve a political step on their replication cycle. A frequent strategy, for example, is to present the delusions as recondite and counterintuitive, and the truth is simplistic and wrong. The Emperor's New Clothes strategy is a proven recipe for defeating Occam's razor, who, for example, really understands the Trinity, but if you don't understand the Trinity, aren't you just stupid? Through internal competition, this counterintuitive delusion generates a revolutionary elite deeply steeped in Trinitology. The harder it is to understand the delusion, the more dedicated your cadre will be. Yeah, Logos, almost like the scientific white lab coat priesthood with all of their really weird physics isn't like exactly the same thing.
Yeah, basically.
Another good general strategy for high morbidity is antinomianism, the opposition to law. Since the rule of law can be defined in terms of property rights, property is any right that you can own. Any meme that opposes property opposes law. Well, there you go, Logos. Checkmate.
Wow. Wow.
Checkmate. We're done. Over, guys. Well, to quote a famous libertarian, hashtag not an argument, it therefore declares continuous and informal transfers of resources to be morally justified. Antinomianism builds political power by providing an easy avenue for punishing enemies and rewarding supporters of all in the service of whatever bogus concept of justice our parasite concocts as a replacement for law. Finally, our parasite will employ a strategy of politicization, insisting that everyone in a society be involved in the contest for political power. Wait, Logos, if he wants to have a virus where everybody's involved in the contest for political power, why the heck is he telling the hobbits to not be involved in the contest for political power?
Well, he's not claiming that he's a parasite. I think parasite's pejorative.
Well, no. What I think he's doing, we know he's doing something he thinks is positive, because he says, where was it? He just said it. Is it really bad if it makes everybody happy? Do you remember that? We just read that.
Well, yeah, that's a rhetorical question.
Well, of course it's a rhetorical question, because he's trying to create his own memeplex. I think he's talking about himself.
Well, I think he wants to build a memeplex, but I think he's going to deny that the memes he's building are parasitic ones.
Well, they're not harmful.
Yeah.
But he's still building one.
Well, sure.
And I think that's what he's doing, because he wants...
So in this article, he's talking about two things.
Yes.
How memes spread and when
Yes.
how to identify harmful memes. So obviously, he's not going to talk about himself as identifying harmful memes, but he is going to talk about strategies where ideas like his can spread.
Right, which is like using that memology to spread ideas.
Right.
And so if you accept his ideas, so he's saying that, okay, the way I'm going to convince all of my readership, all of my future fan base, is to build this, like, vaccine, if you will, where we have like the good virus, because a vaccine is just it's a portion of the virus, but not all of it, and it's enough to build immunity. And so I think that's what he's trying to say here. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, where were we talking about? Political. Okay, property rights. Yeah, we did that. Okay, so our parasite, he wants people that believe his way to be involved in the contest for political power. The very thing he's telling his fans not to do. This is insane. What the heck?
Wait. I'm confused. Is he saying our parasite in the sense of our parasite that we're analyzing, or is he saying like our parasite, like the thing we're going to build?
Well, it sounds like he's building something.
Well, it sounds like he's building an antidote. So what he's trying to say is,
yes.
So before we can build an antidote, we have to examine the parasite. So our parasite that we're examining to build an antidote for will have these properties.
Right.
Right. So he's trying to build an antidote against a parasite that employs a strategy of politicization.
Okay, so you're saying that the "our" in this sense doesn't mean our Wuhan parasite that we're going to release.
No.
But
I think it means our parasite we're trying to build an antidote for.
We'll have to keep reading. Okay, but we'll have to keep reading. Since our memetic parasite is already bound to one or more political factions, politicization leaves us with no option to ignore it and simply live their lives. Neutrality is not acceptable. All those who are not actively infected and who do not openly endorse the parasite are by definition its enemies, and they will be crushed. The safest thing is to play along and raise your children in the faith, even if you don't really believe they will. High contagion and adaptive morbidity will allow our parasite to spread widely and rise to power, where it can continuously propagate itself through educational institutions. But there is still another problem: persistence. If our parasite does not resist competitors or succumbs easily to healthy counter-parasites, it won't last long and it won't be much of a threat. It should be as hard as possible for hosts to reject the parasite, whether they are replacing it with a competitor or simply returning to reason. Our first defense against rejection is mere euphoria. It should feel good to be infected. It should improve the host's self-esteem, making them feel like a better, happier person. If they need to make sacrifices for the faith, if they suffer for it, fine, they're doing what's right. At a certain level, euphoria graduates into full-on anesthesia. Anesthetized hosts can endure horrific suffering or the moral pain of inflicting suffering on others in the name of the faith. Did a wolf come into your house and eat your baby? You have been blessed. The wolf is a sacred animal of Rome. Your baby now dwells with the city of the gods of the city. If the wolf comes again, pet him and speak to him sweetly and at least give him a hamburger or something. Indiscriminate and total anesthesia constitutes ovanization. An ovanized individual never imagines responding to any kind of threat with any kind of defensive action, certainly not violence. To an ovanized, anything bad that happens is either A, an accident, or B, the result of some sin or moral error. The concept of the enemy doesn't exist. Okay, well, let's run with what you're saying, Logos, and we'll read this to the end and see if we can get a better picture. But on your reading, if we take that reading, clearly Moldbug is just ovanized by corporate media.
Yeah, it probably is.
Right. I mean, he's an ovanized individual who's got the memeplex of corporate media, which is only 0.1% of the equation. Remember that, Logos. Needless to say, euphoria, anesthesia, and ovanization all generally inhibit the ability of our host to react against the parasite and eject it. Agreed, right? Moldbug 16 years later still hasn't given up. Money doesn't have power.
Right.
So yeah, he's ovanized and anesthetized really badly, and it's followers from their lives. But sometimes this is not enough. Humans, after all, are bipedal apes. They evolved from some very truculent ancestors. Even if they are specialized for civilization, a certain degree of genetic ovanization is almost certainly present in populations which have lived in governed societies for many generations. Occasional throwbacks are to be accepted. Therefore, diversionary hysteria is another essential tactic in our parasites' bag of tricks. Oh, logos. You mean like going after the people that don't actually control things, like, the dying press?
Mm-hmm.
How about that? Does that constitute hysteria now, logos?
Might be.
Hosts who would otherwise be tempted to notice the morbidities of infection and attribute them to the parasite itself must be diverted. Either the defensive energies will be directed towards the other symptoms, which are in fact not serious, or they will attribute the real problems to other causes, which are not in fact significant. Oh my gosh, logos. It's not the money. It's this like blue-haired professor.
Mm-hmm.
He just walked right into it, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
We can kill two birds with one stone. Well, if that blue-haired professor, by the way, logos turned out to be a turf, gone.
Yep.
So much for the power of the blue-haired professor, huh? We can kill two birds with one stone by directing our hysteria towards those who reject the parasite and identifying their efforts to cure it as the cause of their morbidity. The strategy of counter-immunity, in which the infected treat disinfection as if it were contagious, which of course it is, has been a staple of memetic parasites through the ages. The goal of a counter-immunity strategy such as the Inquisition is to eradicate heresy, but this is actually only the simplest approach to counter-immunity. We can get much fancier. Suppose, for example, our parasite does not try to eradicate counter-immune responses, but in fact tolerates them. However, we make sure this heretical meme are contained and cannot engage in any serious attack on our replicative cycle. That way we have them where we can see them under control. How might we accomplish this? Our approach is to maintain a neutered false opposition. This gang of tolerated heretics against whom our wise philosophers speak out at every opportunity must be unable to establish a replication cycle of their own. I mean, that actually describes the modern left since like 1960 very well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's his goal.
Now, in this case, I would agree. The modern left is this neutered false opposition. Bush lied about Iraq, but he didn't lie about 2001. Sure, guys. Sure. For example, the tame heretical memeplex may include a meme which is delusional, in which anyone intelligent is obviously resistant to, thus binding to and disabling the dangerous counter memes, which would attack our parasite by blocking the early adopters who would otherwise be tempted to consider the heresy. Similarly, it may include unfashionable memes which impair its power of social transmission, and it may be administratively excluded from educational transmission. It is hard to prevent parental transmission, but as we've seen, over time, parents will tend to lose the battle against educational institutions, especially if social transmission is also blocked. So, okay, this is the second time he's brought this out. Educational institutions trump parents. Yes. So, Moldbug, why are you telling DeSantis not to fight back? It almost sounds like he wants the left to win.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, again, what does he expect? A Caesar to take power and at the federal level change all this? That's not going to happen.
Well, he's down on that too, because Trump was the closest thing we've had in modern times to a Caesar. And even when Trump forced his way into getting certain things done, that wasn't good enough either. So even a Caesar wouldn't be good enough for Moldbug, because Caesars aren't permanent.
But wait, aren't Caesars formal?
As long as they're in charge. I think Moldbug would say that our system makes it impossible to have a Caesar because presidents are temporary and ultimately feckless.
True. Oh, let's see. An especially effective approach is to treat the heretical memeplex as if it were in fact the dominant parasitic meme. Thus, siding with the parasite will be seen as an act of resistance and defiance, opposed which tends to be fashionable. This is what Moldbug's doing, right? Because the actual memeplex is the money system, which he says doesn't exist, and then he blames the fake opposition, the left, as the true power. How's that?
Sounds reasonable.
Thus, siding with the parasite will be seen as an act of resistance and defiance, a pose which tends to be fashionable. Furthermore, if the delusional strategy is employed, our friendly host will be able to identify other delusions among the heretics who will be unfashionable and educationally isolated. Since parasites mutate, evolve, and improve over time, a good choice for a tame heresy may in fact be an older edition of our parasite itself. Normally, this would simply be discarded, not tolerated at all. By definition, it is less competitive. However, if we do tolerate it, we could modify it to attract heretics, doubters, and unbelievers of all kinds, keeping them safely neutered. Hosts infected with the latest version of this parasite will treat those sticks in the mud as deluded fools who have not yet liberated themselves from the ancient doctrines and seen the new brighter light, who, even worse, are working actively to prevent the truth from being born. Clearly, they must be stopped, and so on. Well, if we're just going to run with this for a moment, this is me talking, Logos, not trying to psychoanalyze Moldbug. But I think that's exactly why this sort of like Lockean libertarianism is preserved. Because a lot of otherwise conservative right-wing people that could be a real threat to the system get like trapped in this like, old obsolete version of the Enlightenment, which is going to go nowhere because, who gives a crap about self-ownership really? And they're totally feckless because of it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, could be.
I think at this point we have pretty good design for a successful memetic parasite, don't you agree? If not, how do you think the parasite could be improved? Of course, this sort of intelligent design by no means implies that any such beastie was designed by some purpose of plan. We're just trying to reverse engineer the effects of Darwinian selection. Now let's compare Professor Dawkins' target the God delusion to this ideal parasite. Forgetting other religions for a moment, Christianity clearly fits the profile. Every one of the strategies observed above has been employed by some Christian sect, some set of believers in the God delusion at some point in time. Yeah, but that also has been the case of the meme of science, this religion of science going back to Newton. And how do you think that spread, Logos?
By successful feats of engineering.
Well, Christianity succeeded through moral transformation.
Right. That's the part he's not taking into account. These things don't spread unless they're successful some way.
Yeah. But what I do mean, though, is that if you're going to use this framework, which I hate, science itself falls under this framework of transmission. And that's what they don't want to admit. Let's see. Yeah. However, if I may project a little, Professor Dawkins' readers are not concerned about the Anabaptists, the Arians, the Monophysites, the Nestorians, or any such obsolete sect. They are concerned with the vintage 2007 American Christian fundamentalism. If your goal is to solve a problem, the problem must exist in the present tense. Fundamentalist Christianity, I prefer the term salvationism, because the belief that only those who are born again in Christ will be saved is essential to almost all fundamentalist sects, certainly matches some of our above descriptions. For example, it's clearly political and it's clearly using doctrines as an organizing tool. Antinomianism is a little harder to find. Salvationists, for the most part, of anything big believers in law and order. But depriving women of the right to control their bodies counts to some extent, although this right cannot be transferred and thus only attacks enemies without benefiting supporters. If this isn't morbidity, I don't know what is.
Whoa. Well, now I know why he's pissed off about Roe.
Yeah. What do you know?
There it is. There it is.
Boyos. There it is. That's why he doesn't like Roe, because there we go. No, but remember. This is a right wing thinker. This is like a dope right wing thinker who's ahead of all the curves. Remember that. Remember that. In the contagion department, however, salvationism is curiously lacking compared to other successful memetic parasites of the past. For example, Catholicism before the Reformation. Its presence in educational institutions is negligible. Wait, does he mean now? Because as of 2007, half the Supreme Court's Catholic, and as of 2023...
No. He's saying compared to Catholicism, this Protestant fundamentalism that's being talked about by Dawkins...
is negligible.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's true. In fact, under present law, salvationism is entirely barred from the mainstream educational system. At present, its great ambition seems to be sabotage the teaching of Darwinian evolution in American public schools, a goal which it has been generally unsuccessful in. And even if it were to succeed in this, I find it almost entirely impossible to see how it could be of any adaptive value to the salvationist memeplex. This probably needs to be used as an overlay for his attack on DeSantis.
Yeah, probably.
Right, not that he's saying DeSantis is a creationist, but that he's saying that DeSantis is engaging in the same kinds of school battles that the creationists did and lost. But
that's basically what he's accusing him of, yes.
But the difference is this is not 2007. And
the difference also is that while the Christians were fighting a battle kind of unique to Christians, I mean, let's be real, the vast majority of people probably don't even remember what they learned about evolution in biology class 20 years ago. People will remember their kids dealing with like men in their locker rooms, like their little girls dealing with men in their locker rooms. They will remember porn in the school libraries. They will remember this is like the erosion of a universal virtue, basically, as far as the school system goes. And that's the core difference between now and then. But Moldbug is still thinking about now in terms of then as if they're the same thing.
Yes. Yes. And that's the problem, right? Because the issue DeSantis is dealing with, like you said, it's a global issue, not just this narrow Christian issue. Nor social transmission of any help, because salvationism is incredibly unfashionable. Quick, how many salvationist celebrities can you name? At the average chic dinner party in Manhattan, how many of the guests are likely to be salvationists? How many salvationists are employed by Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, Random House, Viking, or Nuff, and so on? So one might argue the salvationist meme is a threat. It's just a small threat. It needs to be kept in its place. That's all. Sure, the influence of the God delusion has been steadily decreasing for the last 400 years, but if we take our eye off it, it might come back. I'm certainly not prepared to dismiss this as absolutely inconceivable. However, there's another candidate we have to consider. In the first chapter of the God Delusion, Professor Dawkins describes himself as a deeply religious non-believer. He calls his belief system Einsteinian religion and waxes poetical as follows. Let me sum up Einsteinian religion in one quotation from Einstein himself. To the sense that behind anything that cannot be experienced, there is something that our mind cannot grasp, and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly in its feeble reflection that is religiousness. In this sense, I am religious. It's easy to see that this statement is not exactly the general theory of relativity, and in fact, it appears to have no factual content at all. What exactly is this Einsteinian religion? Did Professor Dawkins invent it? Did Einstein? What did Einstein believe in? What do Einsteinians believe in besides beauty and sublimity? Are there other Einsteinians, or need only distinguished scientists apply? If an Einsteinian were to stoop to anything so mundane as voting, would he or she who would he or she vote for? And how does Einsteinian religion stack up against our parasite test? We'll consider these fascinating issues in chapter 2. Oh boy, Logos, there's 7 chapters. We really locked ourselves into this one.
Well, yeah, spoiler alert, he's going to go after Dawkins for himself being subsumed by some broader religion more dangerous than Christianity.
Yeah, that's
basically what's going to happen.
You know who else said that? Believe it or not, Noam Chomsky. He was asked once this was like during the War on Terror, peak War on Terror. Mm-hmm. And he said, what do you think about the new atheists? And somebody mentioned in the audience, people like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris. And he said, oh, yeah, they're far worse than Christians or Muslims. They believe in the dangerous religion of the state.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, technically he's not wrong. I mean, look how many people the U.S. has killed in the last 20 years.
It's true, yeah.
I mean, I'll give it to Chomsky, Chomsky. But,
I mean, Chomsky basically preempted Sam Harris going off the deep end. I mean, Sam Harris was literally like, yeah, Biden's son could have kids in his in his basement. I still wouldn't care.
Yeah, so you're saying that the fact that Chomsky said that years ago preempted this, yeah.
100%. My side having power is the ultimate goal of the religion, and people like Harris and all them, irrational people, basically like
super rational boys. We're rational.
Exactly.
All they want is power. All the left wants is power. All these people that I've said want power. That's it. That's all they want. That's all there is to their position. Oh, this is good. Cyber Ninja Zero. Moldbug is QAnon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people should just call him as such every time he brings up this dark elf stuff.
Trust the plan.
Trust the plan.
Let's see.
I mean, even for QAnon, at least supposedly we kind of know who these people are, right? So they're dissenters in the army. Some of them are retired and going public and saying we still have connections inside. They're supposedly people, disaffected in the army. They're communicating in code. You can interpret that code to figure out what their plan actually is. And then here's what it'll look like when they win. For Moldbug, we don't know who these dark elves are because they're hiding themselves in secret lest they be ousted by the elites. We don't know what their plans are because they can't tell us without outing themselves. We don't know what it's going to look like when they win because they're going to subtly influence the culture so much that it'll just be the new normal and we'll be happy with it. Like, go through every checkbox comparing these two, and QAnon ends up more sane than what he's asking people to do.
So I also, this is relevant. I don't know this guy's name, just in Arabic. Are you guys right wing? And then Minoan replies, yes. Yeah, we're third. Well, I'm third positionist. And what that means is we're anti-capitalist. No, I mean, would you fall in that position too, Logos?
Yeah, I mean, you said Keith watched one of your interviews and he joked that you're a right-wing Marxist. And I think that's the closest I'd get to describing my position too. And there's no good way really to describe my position. Is something like paleo-conservative Marxist or something. I don't know.
The point is this system of finance and capital and banking is the problem. And if you criticize that, you'll be called a leftist. I don't know what else to say, Logos.
Yep.
Was there anything else that I wanted to respond to here? I don't think so. Okay, so let's sum up what I think we've discovered with this timely confluence of material. One, what I said in the very beginning about Moldbug being a stern right or just somebody only concerned with power without any principles is true, as we've seen 16 years later with his interview on Auron MacIntyre. Ideas don't matter, principles don't matter, just power. You know who said that to you? Lenin. So, whatever. So I was right about that. The second thing is Moldbug has not changed at all in 16 years. Money doesn't have power. He's still saying that now.
All this is spontaneous.
All this is spontaneous.
It's just memetic natural selection.
And then what was the other one? There's something else that we read that was the same thing we just heard.
Well, it was discussion of the education system.
That one is it, yeah.
But what's interesting is, he aptly describes exactly how control of the education system can be used to spread dominant memes. But then he's like, no, right-wingers, don't make bills trying to take control of the K through 12 education system. Let the left keep spreading the dominant memes that I'm ostensibly trying to fight.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's that. The fact that there's something very off about Moldbug, not just that he's wrong, but that he's wrong in the same way, protecting a certain group of people, and he's awfully close to the CFR apparently. So, yeah, Moldbug is completely. No, this is what I think. Okay, no, you're right about the broader Dawkins getting pwned, right? But I believe that Moldbug was trying to release his own memeplex, but it wasn't to the blue state elites, like he says, as the dark elves. It's to release to the right to neuter them.
Probably, yeah.
Right, because everything he does now is trying to neuter the right. So I think his whole plan all along was to release these memes to neuter the right.
And honestly, you want to know what's funny about this, Todd? We're going to find ourselves as odd bedfellows with a certain other person who's been saying this about the Moldbugians recently.
You don't mean Ben Burgess, do you?
No, I mean James Lindsay.
Oh, what has James Lindsay been saying?
James Lindsay's been saying he's been fighting with like Auron MacIntyre on Twitter and other Moldbug people, and he's basically like, this whole strategy that Moldbug is employing is he let me see if I can get it right. He called it something like a black-pilled defeatist attempt at demoralizing the right, and he means demoralization in the sense of who's that Russian guy? You got the video.
Yuri Bezmenov.
Yeah, he means demoralization in the Bezmenov sense. He thinks the whole thing is a Bezmenovian demoralization project from the right within itself.
Whoa. He might be right. How do we get this information to him?
I don't know. But I disagree with Lindsay on almost everything, but I think he's actually got Moldbug's number on this one.
I think he is right. I mean, Moldbug has never offered any solutions ever.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to say? I think we've covered all the material we want.
I don't know. Any more nuggets from the chat?
No. the chat sort of doing its own ththing. So
Fair enough.
and
And
I'm
I'm
not
good.
doing part 2. That's going to be another 40 minutes. We're not doing part 2 of Dawkins got pwned.
Well, at least we'll be prepared for it this time.
Yeah, but man, oh man, what a confluence of events.
Yeah.
To just put all this together. This was a really high energy episode. So, all right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast signing off.